All right, we're back for lecture three. Thank you for coming back, or for showing up for the first time. Either way, it was great. So in this third part of the lecture, we're going to look at kind of the miscellaneous aspects. So as you may have noticed from reading through the text, it always kind of starts with a little bit of theory and then words that conform to the theory, and then the book just kind of throws a bunch of miscellaneous stuff at you at the end. So I wanted to touch on that. This will be a much bigger part of the lectures as we go on because that miscellanea becomes a bigger part of the chapter. But for right now, we just have a couple things to talk about. So we were talking in the previous lecture about how to find stems of words and those kind of turn into English words, right? The word always in Latin, the word be becomes the English word aviary because we took that stem and we added a suffix. Sometimes, though, the Latin word just comes into English in interesting ways. And often it is because it's come into English through some sort of specialized field. So the word alumnus, this is the word everyone knows alumnus, right? You're in college. So we all know kind of you graduated high school, so you know you're alumnus or an alumna of your high school. Soon when you graduate SUSU, you will be an alumnus or an alumna of your college. Now, because technically, if you're using this word correctly, let's say alumnus just means graduate, right? It's just a fancy way of saying graduate. But because it's a Latin word, if you identify as a man, you're an alumnus. If you identify as a woman, you're an alumna. Those are technically the right words. But as Latin fell away and no one wanted to be bothered, maybe it's just this, instead we started just using the plural forms. So very few people will say, I am an alumnus of whatever. They will say, I am an alumni. That's just common English usage. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just common English usage. And I would say that most people say they're an alumni, regardless of whether or not they're a man or a woman. It's a plural form. It doesn't make any sense, but that's just how it's used. Alumni is technically masculine plural. So that's why some people will say if you're a woman, you should say you're an alumni, AE ending, because that's feminine. But either way, these are plural nouns. So it doesn't make any sense to add a gender to this. But the book brings this up. It just says we use the plural form of this word alumnus, and it's just one of those weird quirks. So that's where. So I would say use whatever. I've actually gone to a very weird internet fight with somebody about the word alumni. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. So alumni is standard and I think alumni is great, but you can do whatever you want, obviously. The academy is just funny. And the reason it's so weird is because it is associated with higher education, right? And there's just a lot of funny things associated with that. Now, data or data. No, we say data. That's crazy. The word data technically is a plural. So datum by itself means thing having been given. I think we will actually eventually learn this Latin verb. It comes from a Latin word do, which means to give. So data means thing having been given. Data means things having been given. So technically, data is plural. The reason this would be interesting, of course, is when you're writing in English, technically you should use a plural noun, a plural verb when you're talking about data. So those data are interesting. But we normally wouldn't do that, right? We'd say that data is interesting. But technically, you should say those data are interesting. So again, I leave it to you. We get to decide our own fate. That's just a funny word in English. And I mean, I'd be hard pressed to say how I would define data in English without reverting to the Latin thing having information, right? Like the data, points of information. So yeah, anyhow, so that's something the book talks about it. So the word opus is a neuter noun. This is the third declension neuter noun. So opus is nominative, operis is genitive. So technically operi is the stem. And we see that sometimes that comes up. But because of music, I think that's the first place we see it. We see the phrase magnum opus. So like Beethoven's magnum opus was blah blah blah, or Beethoven himself could have just had opus number five, right? So technically that just means like work number five. So we see opus a lot in English through the specialized field of music. Opera is works, right? It's that noun, opus, operas in the plural. So opera is technically a series of works, but we of course now use opera as a singular noun. Like I loved Verdi's opera. And I don't think you would ever use a plural noun with the singular word opera. So It's just a fun thing that came in through music. So bacterium technically is the singular form of bacteria. If you're going into the medical field, that's probably very interesting and important thing to know. And then medium, if you're like, I actually wrote my PhD dissertation on medium versus media, not those exact words, but so medium is what we're talking about here is the means by which something is transmitted. So Tolkien told the story of the Fellowship of the Ring via the medium of a book. Um, Currently, we are all learning a lot via the medium of social media. I think that went through. Um, yeah, I guess you couldn't say that via the medium of social media because you'd have to say via the medium of Twitter, understanding something like that Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, these are all medium by themselves, but they're media together. So media is the plural form of medium. It's important to note, though, this is not strictly related to medium, like that's medium temperature. They're related, but they're not the same concept. So anyhow, so those are some fun miscellaneous words. Yeah. All right, so now we're going to talk about suffixes. So we talked about roots in the previous lecture. So now we're just going to focus on some suffixes that we're going to be saying over and over and over and over again. So again, I would say it's good to know what the suffixes mean in particular, but the most important thing, I think, is to know if that suffix creates an adjective or a noun. So we're going to see that. As our book points out, some adjectives in English become nouns, but that has nothing to do with the suffix. So the word terminal, which I've mentioned before, the AL ending on terminal makes it an adjective. So terminal diagnosis. This is the terminal bus route. Uh, yeah. But we in English have decided, have just through usage, have turned that adjective into a noun, but that has nothing to do with the suffix. So that's something we'll be kind of dealing with as we go through the semester. But it's important to, the most important thing right now is to know that AL tends to be an adjective ending and that we in English often turn adjectives into nouns. So final is another. Final is definitely an adjective, right? Started fine. And even in the word final exam, final is an adjective modifying exam. But because of just usage, we now say finals. But this word final still technically was an adjective to begin with, and that AL suffix tells us that. Okay, I hope that made sense. All right, so here's our first suffix. The Latin suffix in Latin was the Latin suffix in Latin, she said brilliantly. The Latin suffix form is alis. In English, that becomes al, just the letters al. And so that creates an adjective, characteristic of adjective. So terminal, final, provincial, corporal, related to the body, cordial, related to the heart, though of course that comes to mean friendly, formal, related to the form. And you can think about that on your own. Mental, related to the mind. Temporal, related to time. Verbal, related to verbs. Words, all words. So that's our first suffix. Very, very common. So this is our second, our second suffix in Latin. It's anus, or probably onus if I'm being a grown up. Onus, and then in English it becomes either an, on, or ane, ane. So I mentioned during the introductory lectures urban versus urbane. Those are the exact same words. They just do different things in English because of usage. This also, of course, creates an adjective. Both urban and urbane technically should mean related to the city, characteristic of the city. And then avian, characteristic of birds, mundane, characteristic of the world, all adjectives. All right, our next, this one's great because you just see it all over the place. Arium in Latin is the suffix, and in English it's also arium or airy, A-R-Y, much shorter. So this creates a noun, and specifically it means a place for something. So an aviary, the stem here is ARY, means a place for verbs. The place for birds. The root stem is avi. The suffix is ARY, so it's a place for avi. It's a place for verbs. Wow, I can't believe I've done that same mistake twice. It's a place for birds. An aviary is a place for birds. Now, ovary is also a good one because you have your stem slash root is ove, which as you remember means egg. And then airy is the suffix. So this is a place for eggs. An ovary is a place for eggs. and we're so lucky to have them. The other place that you're probably if at least maybe it's just people my age, but when I see the suffix arium, I think sanitarium. Sanitarium, we haven't learned the word sonus yet. I'm sure we will, maybe in the next chapter. Maybe in this chapter. Anyhow, we're going to eventually learn the word sonus means healthy. So this is a very ironically named word because the sanitarium should be a place for healthy, place for health, but it comes to be a place for sick people, right? So it's like a euphemism. It's really interesting, but anyhow. Okay, so that's that suffix, creates a noun. Arius and oh, but so no, this isn't this delightful. So area, this suffix airy can create a place, a noun, aviary, ovary. However, it can also create an adjective, and that's because in this instance, it's coming from the Latin arius, whereas in this instance, it's a shortening of arium. So it's very arbitrary. Like I wouldn't worry about that. What we need to be familiar with is that airy can create a noun, meaning place for, but it can also create an adjective, meaning characteristic of. So temporary, temporary is not a place for time, but it's a characteristic of time. It is related to time. So unfortunately, I only have that one example now, but there will definitely be more. Okay, so our next suffix, the Latin is ilis, and so in English that becomes il, il, or il, ile. This also creates an adjective. So for instance, civil. Civil has the stem root, "q," which means citizen, and then the suffix il. So if you are civil, you are acting in a way characteristic of a citizen. And because this is coming from Rome and citizens were the best, it's a good quality. So our next suffix, the Latin is inus and the English is ein. This again creates an adjective. So the mainly you see this with animal, I think. I'm sure there's other examples, but so ursine. Urs is our stem, meaning bear, and then ein is the adjectival suffix. So if you're ursine, you are like a bear. I'm sure eventually we're going to see porcine, porcine. Pork means pig, so something that's porcine is characteristic of a um, pig. Feline, canine. Feline and canine, characteristic of a cat on the one hand, feline, characteristic of a dog on the other. Though this is just a fun fact, it has nothing to do with this class. The Romans did not often keep cats as pets. Egypt really had a had a monopoly on that, but they kept both the Romans and the Greek kept like ferrets instead of cats. So yeah, just a fun fact. But the Nordic people really loved cats. Okay, so here is another suffix, etas in Latin, et or ite or ity or ety in English. This creates a noun. State quality action creates a noun. And so we see this all over the place. So aridity, the state of being dry, atrocity, the state of being atrocious, brevity, the state of being short, fatuity, forgot to fatuous, so the state of being silly, gravity, the state of being heavy, that sort of thing. So that's all over the place. It's a delightful way of creating a noun. Here is another one. Osis is the Latin suffix, which becomes ous or ose in English. So I mean, we've seen this, you see it all the time. It creates an adjective. So atrocious. So it's something that's atrocious is characteristic of atrox, which means bad, right? Something that's fatuous is characteristic. Okay, I can't not know exactly what the book's translation of fatu is. Can't believe it left my brain. Fatu. Foolish. Okay. Did I say silly? Okay, foolish. So if something's fatuous, it's characteristic of silly, meaning it's silly. It's full of silliness. Vacuous, characterized by emptiness. Verbose, same word, just slightly different stem, means characterized by wordiness. Yeah, so that's that one. And that's it. Okay, so those are the suffixes. Now I know it's a very weird lecture to give. It's a very weird lecture to listen to, I'm sure, because we're just going to be kind of exposing ourselves to words. I think sometimes I may have some helpful ways for you to remember. I think sometimes just being exposed to these things will be useful. So, but this is what we're going to be doing moving forward, is we're going to be looking at roots and stems, and then we're going to be practicing putting suffixes and prefixes on them. And then we'll be seeing some funny ways in which language changes. So stick with me. It's going to be great. Next time, we're going to learn some Latin verbs. So today we were doing nouns and adjectives. We're going to move on to verbs for not just the next one, but for the two chapters, for the other two chapters in this module. But there's some great verbs, and yeah, and so we're going to learn some more stems, and we're going to learn so many prefixes in the next. So come next time to find out the difference between the prefix ab with a B and ad with a D. It is a disgustingly frustratingly complex difference. So, all right, thank you, and I will see you next time.